this is Ariel from France. Bonjour. Today I will be making the incredibly colorful outfit of Jaskier, the bard in my second favorite video game, The Witcher 3. First one is Terraria. Best game. Even though the live adaptation had amazing actors, I really didn't like the costumes. It still had some good parts, of course. Anyways, I will be making the outfit of Jaskier, or Dandelion, from the game, because this costume is colorful, fun, and just fabulous. This costume will be pretty complicated, will take weeks to complete, and I had the materials in stock, but to buy the fabric new could cost a bit. So let's get to work! I first made a quick pattern by draping some fabric on my mannequin, but just for the bodice. The materials will be this color-changing silk, orange cotton lining, velvet in magenta, turquoise and dark blue, some leftover cottons for interfacing and stabilizing the fabrics, metallic thread and yarn, then I will do some resin accessories. I cut the orange lining and used it as a first mock-up. A proper mock-up would have been better, but I was too eager to start. Anyways, with a few adjustments, I had a working pattern. To paint my fabric, I built a frame of 4 wood scraps and just 8 screws, and attached the color-changing silk on it. I traced the pattern pieces with chalk. You can see I made a few mistakes, but it will disappear later, so it's fine. I mixed simple acrylic paint with a fabric medium, then I could just apply it with a brush. You just have to iron it after it dries, and it can survive washes. I painted random flowers with a dark blue color, then added highlights with turquoise paint. With that done, I left it to dry and started on the shorts. It is a layer of white cotton for the shape, then a layer of orange cotton that will be bunched up, and then the pink velvet straps. On the orange layer, I made 2 big pockets on the side seams for all the coins that will probably be tossed at you. The front and back of the shorts is not a simple straight strap, but follow the curve of the crotch. This velvet is very beautiful, but doesn't have enough body, so I backed those pieces with a stiff cotton in pink, as well as the straps. Then I cut the leftover silk in strips to make a lot of bias. Each strap is binded on both edges, sewn once, then folded twice. And I used a decorative stitch on my machine with metallic thread for a little shiny detail. As you can imagine, this took a while. All this can be attached to the waist, and I inserted a little zipper in the front. After that, I made a waistband in silk with a cotton backing for strength. It is a long rectangle, sewn once by machine, then folded on the other side neatly, and then I sewed it shut by hand. I could then try it on, and after a little samba session, I could decide on the length. I made it shorter than the reference to be a little more flattering to my bottom. The bottom part of the short is just binded by a large strip of dark blue velvet. Same as before, it is sewn once by machine, then folded and closed by hand. Voila! Finished tiny ridiculous shorts. Okay, back to the bodice. Those things here are clearly supposed to be a decorative trim, but I made them with some magenta velvet, backed with cotton. I basted the shape I needed with contrasting thread. This keeps the cotton underneath stable. Then I kind of drawn the general shapes with a pen. Then I used a free motion foot. This is an amazing attachment foot that many sewing machines have. It has a little spring inside and allows you to sew in any direction. It is so fun and so fast. I highly recommend you try it. I used metallic thread and kind of improvised while following the general lines that I drew. Ah, c'est pas mal ça! To make the motif more visible, I used a metallic yarn and redrew the lines using a chain stitch by hand. It makes the whole thing a lot more fancy. I could cut out those shapes, as well as the painted silks from before, leaving 1 cm seam allowance all around my pattern pieces. Those colors really cheered me up. The silk was a bit too flimsy, so I backed it with a simple cotton. I serged those together to keep the fabric from fraying, and it will be lined so no white will be visible anyways. I removed the basting stitches and pinned the velvet and the silk together. The whole bodice could be assembled. Before moving on, I added a row of decorative golden chain stitch to all the seams, so it looks more like a trim. I made the peplum part of the bodice, then I could make the inside borders in velvet as well. In the front, and then the bottom. It was all maintained in place with some hand sewing, invisible from the outside. So with the bodice part done, I started on the sleeves. I cut a sleeve cap in orange, then cut another shape in turquoise, cutting it bigger so it will be bunched up when they all attach together. I made 2 rows of gathering stitches to make the turquoise fit in the orange part. Now it was time to make more strips. They are done in the same way as before, just in dark blue instead of pink. And this took a while again. I tried to fit all the strips to the sleeve cap, making sure they have some room to puff out and not lay too flat. I sewed them in place and then move on to the next step, which was the shoulder moon cushion thing. This. It's just a crescent shape in blue velvet, filled with cotton batting from an old pillow. Bien moelleux. I made some little straps in velvet. On this step you can clearly see how the velvet kind of frays into this velvet dust that gets everywhere. There is a little gold decorative stitch on the straps, then I cut them to fit on the velvet moons, des petits croissants de velours. They are attached to the top of the sleeve, and then I can move on to the rest of the arm. It is just a turquoise tube, which will be mostly covered with the cuff. For the cuff, I traced the shape on an interfaced velvet. I haven't mentioned it before, but velvet is just awful to sew by machine. It kind of shifts around when you sew, and it's probably the most difficult fabric. So here, for those little shapes, I had to sew it by hand. I turned this inside out, and then hand sewn a decorative cord on the edge. It's not perfect, but it works, so it's fine. I attached the cuff and turned the whole sleeve inside out, then used a little backstitch to keep the cuff in place. I just needed to finish the edges with a strip of blue velvet that I had to sew again by hand, because velvet is just to sew by machine, and it's actually pretty pleasant to sew by hand. And with those strips attached, I had finished the sleeve. I made a tiny collar with velvet. I had to sew it by machine, so I used 1,000,000 pins to keep the velvet from shifting. I cut the excess fabric on one side to reduce the bulk and turn the color. I could attach it to the rest of the bodice and then made a little backstitch to keep the edge neat and crisp. To assemble the lining of the bodice, I put the bodice on the mannequin inside out and then added the lining and pinned it in place. This way you don't risk the lining pulling on the fabric from the outside and making weird wrinkles. Then I could sew it all around with a tiny fell stitch. This makes it secure and is practically invisible from the outside. Now the sleeves are pinned on the armhole, attached by machine, and then I could close the lining inside on both the arms. Voila, the jacket is finished! Okay, I now need to make some buttons, and I have found the perfect button. But the problem is I only have one, and I will use this resin. I just have to make a mold of the button. I have a silicone and an ice cube tray. I think I might do the same thing for the necklace, but I have to sculpt something in clay first. We'll see how it goes. Let's do some resin. I first mixed the two-part silicone and put it in the ice cube tray. I then pushed the button inside, so it will keep the shape. I did this with all my molds, so then I could pour the resin. It is a two-part resin, so I have to mix it really well. Otherwise, it will never completely cure. I experimented a little bit with red pigments, but it didn't really work, so never mind the colors for now. I poured it in the mold, where I already added the little metal hooks that will be trapped in the resin. This cures in 24 hours. This was my first time using resin and it works really well. Here are the buttons and here are the jewelry. You can see the little metal wire sticking out on either side. My molds were not perfect and I had a little air bubbles, so I used a Dremel to smooth out everything. I still have a few imperfections, but they are not really visible. When everything is spray painted gold, it's already looking really nice. To make them more realistic, I used a little bit of black paint and a lot of water and made a sort of wash on every part. This way, the black stays on the little crevices, making it a lot more realistic. Same for the jewelry. As you can see, I painted my fingers as much as the resin, but it works really well. Look at the buttons. They are very similar to the original I copied. I was really happy about this. So I sewn the button on a jacket. For the necklace, I painted the middle thing red and assembled them with 2 pliers and little rings. I then added 2 fake pearls between each piece, threaded on the same wire. And with that, I have a nice necklace, a bit tacky, but it works really well. And now I am almost done with the costume, I just need a tiny hat. This will be a simple beret, so I cut a long rectangle of blue, put it on the velvet and cut kind of a circular shape. Same with the orange lining. And then I attached the circle to the blue velvet, making little pleats so it will fit around the circle. Sewn one by machine. It is again turned inside out, folded, and sewn by hand. I had a leftover strap, so I added it for decoration. Then to top it off, top it off, get it? Top, hat. Subscribe! Then to top it off, I added feathers. and glued them to an old brooch that will get pinned on the hat. And now my costume is finished. Geen probleem. When a humble bard raced the ride along with Geralt De Rivia, along came this song. Okay, I am not a musician, and this awesome song turned out a little more boring, but you get the reference. Overall, I am really happy with this costume. Even with the velvet, I didn't have big problems to solve, which is unusual. And those colors really made me happy. It is a practical and comfortable costume, and this character is really fun. Toss a coin to your witcher, oh valley of blood. I hope I can wear it one day. Toss a coin to your witcher. I hope you liked this video. Allez, bisous! Bah, t'applaudis pas?